Is the NFL buying or selling the idea that Tyreek Hill's best days are behind him? We're looking into that and more here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. You're on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet with FanDuel wins. Today on the show, the NFL's ESPN top 10 wide receiver poll of scouts, coaches, executives across the league. It's dropped. And some interesting Miami Dolphins nuggets here, not just from a where do they rank, but what was said perspective. And we're going to get into that. We also have the first formal details of the Darren Waller contract, although not all of the pertinent details, but the most important talking point we have at our disposal. So we're going to get into that here today on the show as well. So let's start with Jeremy Fowler's top 10 wide receiver poll. He ask 70 coaches, scouts, executives across the NFL for their top 10 ballots. And this is the next to last one of these that will happen. Cornerbacks tomorrow. Don't hold your breath for any Dolphins corners to be on the list. But the Dolphins do have a player that made the top 10 and then a honorable mention at wide receiver, Tyreek Hill. The interesting thing for me was not whether or not Tyreek was going to make the poll, but what kind of drop was he going to be potentially in store for after the season that was in 2024, where we had the wrist injury in training camp against Washington and joint practices. We had the off-the-field distractions. We had the lack of practice. We had some issues with running the right routes. We had the attendance timeliness in question. And then you had the fallout at the end of the season with removing himself from the game and effectively, indirectly saying he didn't want to be here. And then he changed his mind and this, that, the other thing. It's a whole mess, whole circus. Well, Jamar Chase, who won the Triple Crown last year, finished first. You can read all this on ESPN. And I'm team don't share paywalled content in a public forum, but this is not paywalled content. So we're going to go through it a little bit. Number 2 was Justin Jefferson, who was ranked number 1 in last year's exercise that Jeremy Fowler did. Tyreek Hill came in 3rd, which is surprising to me. Tyreek Hill ranked 2nd last year. The lowest ranking he received in the poll this year was 8th. There were 2 quotes for Tyreek Hill. The rest of the top 10 was CeeDee Lamb at 4, A.J. Brown at 5. I don't agree with A.J. Brown that low. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 6. Malik Neighbors, 7. Nico Collins, 8. Mike Evans, 9. Garrett Wilson rounded out the top 10. But Tyreek only going down 1 spot with the season that he had surprised me. And this part of Fowler goes into, Tua Tagovailoa missed 6 games, and Tyreek appeared to quit. He averaged over 1,500 yards per season from 2020 to 2023. Under 960 yards last year. So if you like prop bets, maybe there's some Tyreek action there that you can find. The attribution for why Tyreek still ranked this high was the word attention. It was referenced as a math changer. And I think Tyreek, with his speed, especially at what we're expecting to be a reduced playing weight this year, is probably going to be indicative of focusing on maintaining as much of that speed. And there was a veteran AFC scout who's quoted in here. Even if he's lost half a step, he's still more explosive than everyone. Power with raw speed. I do think defenses have made some adjustments with Miami's offense, letting him run around with window dressing and limiting big plays. And I think you saw that last year with some of the stuff when he did catch footballs and had opportunities to make decisions in space. I thought you saw some poor decision making from Tyreek with the ball in his hands last year for, am I going to get a couple hard yards? Am I going to press? We're going to try to turn around and get out the back door and create a bigger play, but potentially risk losing yardage in the process. And there were way too many times that last year where I thought Tyreek stopped his feet after the catch and then tried to put a move on somebody, and it allowed everybody to kind of box him in because they're playing so umbrellaed on the back end. So I think that's part of the challenge with Tyreek Hill this past season. And a part of that, you could probably go through and add up the yardage that was lost throughout the games that Tyreek played, and he'd probably have been over 1,000 yards if he just simply catch the ball and take it in stride and get what yards you can versus stopping and doubling back. And then instead of gaining 6 more yards, you lose 2. And you do that 4, 5, 6 times throughout the course of a 17-game season. And it was a lot more than that it felt like he did it. 959 suddenly probably becomes 1,050 or 1,060. You might have been able to add it all up. It might have been the difference of 100 yards. Now, it's still not 1,700. It's not the chase for 2,000 that we were on. But I think the Dolphins offense is in a healthier place when it's playing a little bit more balanced. And I do recognize that the talent was frustrating last year, but it wasn't that Tyreek Hill was not a talented player, right? And that's why this is a player who, because of this respect that he still commands across the league, is getting another opportunity in Miami despite all of the, whatever you want to call it, frustrations, distractions, shortcomings, disappointments, however you want to quantify it, right? There was another quote that I think is kind of telling for if the Dolphins have the kind of success they need this season to kind of move into the next build with everybody else still status quo. I think there's a quote in here from somebody else, an NFC executive, that I think is going to paint the picture for where Miami ultimately goes. So we're going to get into that next here on Locked on Dolphins, and then get into Jaylen Waddle and where he was ranked in this list. We're getting into that next. Stick with us. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're in baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt on the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. If you have an eye on the Super Bowl odds, the Baltimore Ravens right now, the NFL favorite at plus 650. There's a pretty exclusive club of 4 teams that are better than plus 1,000. It's the Baltimore Ravens plus 650, the Buffalo Bills at plus 700, the Philadelphia Eagles at plus 750, and Tyreek Hill's former team, the Kansas City Chiefs, plus 800. If any one of those tickles your fancy and you're new to FanDuel, you could get a $5 bet turned into $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. This other quote is kind of the thought for the future as it pertains to the Dolphins and their offense, assuming they're still running Mike McDaniel's offense beyond the 2025 season, which I think is an important footnote. It's from an NFC executive. He still impacts how you prepare for them so much due to his speed. He dictates so much. His speed hasn't fallen off despite the down year. Also included in here is a stat. Since joining Miami, Hill's 14 receiving touchdowns on throws of 20-plus yards downfield is tied for the most in the league with Philadelphia's A.J. Brown. speed, right? Explosive elements. Dolphins really didn't get a lot of it last year. Their challenge is how do they go about bringing that back into the fray this year? But one thing I feel pretty confident saying is that Tyreek Hill is not going to play for the Dolphins in 2026 with $36 million in compensation owed. And he doesn't really strike me as the kind of guy that's going to just take a pay cut, right? So he's under contract for 2026, but I have a hard time envisioning what the future looks like with how the season ended last year, whether they chose to run it back or not, and whether they chose to run it back or not because Tyreek was at an all-time low from a value perspective and had the wrist surgery, so clearing a physical would have been a problem. And he is an aging player with a disproportionate amount of money for 2026, whatever that looks like, right? And Davante Adams was in the same boat, got cut, and then signed with the Rams after getting traded for a reasonable draft capital in season to the Jets from the Raiders. And I would not be surprised if the Dolphins, if they had a catastrophic start, if they ended up doing something similar to what the Raiders did with Davante Adams, where they traded a conditional pick, had to be like the Jets had to, hear me out, play in the conference championship game. And if Adams dressed for the game, the conditional pick would go up to a 2, but it was a 3, right? If they have a catastrophic start to the season, would not be surprised to see something similar happen, because I think if you wait until after the season's over, you're going to be holding the bag like the Jets did. And Davante Adams had a plenty fine year last year, but it's just a disproportionate amount of age and cost that I feel pretty confident saying, unless the Dolphins are going to do another new contract with Tyreek Hill, which based off of what the ups and downs have been like, I just can't see that world coming to reality, right? You're probably looking at some kind of exit opportunity where maybe a new team takes him on and they pay him all of it up front as a signing bonus, and then they renegotiate an extension with a reduced amount of future money as a result, where you have all different kinds of permutations of what that can look like. But the big thing for me is he still impacts how you prepare for them so much due to the speed. He dictates so much. His speed has not fallen off despite the down year. If they're going to run the McDaniel offense into the future, that role goes to the top of the charts, in my mind. Do you want Jaylen Waddle to be that player? Do you want Jaylen Waddle to be your bucket getter against man coverage and the guy that can run away from people and can create separation? That's the world that I want him to live in. I want him to be the guy that you move all around and find different ways to make him the early progression, but you still have the lift, and you don't ask Waddle to be the Z. We're just going to go to the side of the field where all of the eligibles are, with the exception of one who's maybe the backside in isolation, and have him run the vertical stuff down the field to create the space for all the routes that happen underneath of it. And then you can only alert that guy to throw him the ball down the field. I'd rather have Waddle be the X, and he's not the prototypical 6'4", 215, 220-pound X receiver that's going to fight through contact, but he can get off press coverage. He can route you up. He can create a lot of separation. He can win in isolation because of his ability to defeat man coverage. That's where I think Waddle has the potential to really shine, which means you're going to need the Z player if you move on from Tyreek Hill and this offense is going to continue to evolve. That's the role you need to fill. You're going to need that speed dictated player, like as an example, not saying you'd go out and get this guy because he's under contract with Detroit, but Detroit, when they drafted Jamison Williams out of Alabama as the speed receiver who doesn't get a high volume amount of targets, but has a big yield for explosive plays down the field, because when you do throw him the ball, he's running on the vertical plane, he's creating the stretch, and then when people try to jump the intermediate route that's supposed to unfold and be open underneath of that vertical route, when they drive on that intermediate throw, then you can go up over the top and you could take those shots down the field. It is an offense that's built on speed. We're trying to diversify how the offense operates, the ways in which the offense can operate. But I would hate to have Jaylen Waddle, with how good I believe Jaylen Waddle can be, if put in that primary role with the right players around him, I would hate to relegate him to having to be the speed player that eats a lot of your lift routes down the field that aren't necessarily early in the progression. And that's part of why their offense with Hill and Waddle, they could put those guys on the same side, and then neither one of them has to run the vertical route because teams are automatically going to play off them because they have both of them on the same side of the field. So I think you will need, based off of this quote, it had me thinking, okay, what does the future look like of a McDaniel offense in Miami? Well, yes, they've invested in the interior offensive line. Yes, they have some young tackles. Yes, they got more physical. Yes, they got bigger backs. But at its core, when the conversation moves to what does the future look like without number 10, I don't think you have that asset because I think you'd be wasting Jaylen Waddle to have him be that asset with however you choose to evolve the passing offense. So that's my thought on the two quotes included for Tyreek Hill, who was voted number 3. The honorable mentions here, we went through the top 10 earlier. Terry McLaurin, 11. Puka Nacua, 12, way too low. Brian Thomas at 13, way too low. DK Metcalf at 14. T. Higgins, 15. Devontae Adams, 16. Jaylen Waddle is in the also receiving votes bucket with names like Jamison Williams and Devonta Smith and George Pickens and Calvin Ridley and Cortland Sutton and Ladd McConkey and Chris Godwin and DJ Moore. So this voting poll has 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Kyle does math, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Top 25 wide receiver in the NFL. Off a down year, I think it's probably fair. Now, I think Waddle has all the talent in the world, but he got banged up. The passing offense was down. He needs more of the targets. One guy who's also hoping for some targets this year is Darren Waller, and we have a little bit of clarity on what his terms are, which is very interesting to me. And we don't have all the details, but we have the big one as far as the base salary and what compensation is front row center. We're getting into that next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. So I've been intermediately checking this, and it finally got updated today. There are $3 million in incentives on Darren Waller's contract. It is a 1-year, $2 million contract for Darren Waller. The additional $3 million in incentives are classified as, quote, not likely to be earned. It could be anything because he didn't play last year, right? It's automatically, if you didn't do it last year, it's going to be automatically classified as not likely to be earned. So Waller's going to be on your salary cap books for $2 million in cap space, which is important because we've kind of gone through the numbers crunch in the last week or so since all of these moves were processed, and you're kind of exploring the moving parts of how much salary cap space do the Dolphins actually have. And that's been hard to thread the needle on because we haven't known while we know it was a 5-year, 1-year, $5 million contract, but how much was he actually on the books for? What was incentivized money from a bookkeeping perspective? How much space was he going to occupy? We also don't know from this 1-year, $2 million, if any of it's guaranteed, which is the next big thing, because you could get into camp theoretically if Waller plays horribly or doesn't look like he's in shape, or maybe he gets hurt and you have to maybe do an injury settlement, or maybe Jalen Conyers comes in and is running circles around guys, right? Any one of those variations of Waller not good or somebody else exceptionally good. If Waller doesn't have guaranteed money, you could potentially move on. Now, you'd have transitioned a pick and downgraded a pick, and the pick's based on conditions. And I would assume if Waller doesn't make the team, they get a future 7 back and gave up a 6 for a 7. But that's how you justified the risk, right? Is, well, we would get a pick back if things go poorly. But to know that from a bookkeeping perspective, the top 51 players in the offseason occupy your salary cap space, Waller's going to qualify as one of those top 51, but the player he's bumping off is about $1 million. So you lost about $1 million in cap space to accommodate for Darren Waller with your top 51 window. That further paints the resolution of what kind of cap space do you have at your disposal to sign a cornerback. If you want to sign a quarterback, this team still has to sign Jonah Savaianaya as a part of the ongoing, and this is not the Dolphins' fault per se. I think you could argue with the conviction that the Dolphins have with Jonah, with what they traded to go up and get him and what they said to him. If you're going to sit here and haggle over $1.5 million in salary 4 years from now, and that's preventing you from getting this deal done, I would get it done. But that's just me, and I'm also not one of the teams that is kind of in this awkward limbo of doing things that are unprecedented because rookies, and presumably through the coordination of agents, is putting the entire second round in this limbo status that they're in. But to know that Darren Waller, $1 million in cap space opportunity cost, which is less than what it would have been if you carried Jonnu Smith. Now, obviously, Darren Waller, much bigger risk than Jonnu Smith, nowhere near proven like Jonnu Smith was. But Jonnu Smith didn't want to play for you on the contract that he had. And he was probably going to make it a distraction. And this team said, you know what? We're not doing it this year, guys. We're just not. We're not going to have you come in and sign a 2-year deal and get 1 year in and decide you want to get an upgrade and get a pay raise and get new years on it. And we did that business model. You guys stunk last year. And Jonnu Smith individually did not, but the team as a whole did. And it was the thing that was one of the central themes of the offseason from start to finish. It was Tua in minicamp and not participating. And then was Jalen Ramsey had the injury, right? And Tyreek Hill and Drew Rosenhaus saying after Justin Jefferson got paid that, yeah, we'd like a new contract. We're not going to go crazy on it, but we want a new contract. And like all that had to get done. Raheem Mostert got a 1-year extension, right? Like you go right down the list. Everybody got it. Very few delivered. So they say, you know what? We're not doing it. And from a team perspective, if you're trying to instill the right frame of mind for your group, it was probably necessary because you do it again and again. That's going to become the expectation. It had already become the expectation. So I think you've downgraded at the tight end position, no doubt, but the opportunity cost being moving from a 6 to a future 7, $1 million in cap space, and removing that potential lingering storyline so that everybody who's here is committed to be here, which is what you've talked about all offseason. Like, okay, let's see how it goes. We are 1 week away from the start of training camp, so we have lots more to get into here on the show, including the rest of this week. We're going to look at what my offseason objectives were as a part of the 2025 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint and see how the team did versus the things that I felt were most important back in February and March. That's the rest of the week. You have that to look forward to. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in right here, Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you all again soon. Go Fins.